Hello everybody, it's Kelly Folsom here, and I want to welcome you back to another Vital Art Sessions. And I also want to wish you a happy Valentine's Day. One thing that I believe about Valentine's Day is that it's not just about love with you and a romantic partner, but it's about love in general. And I know sometimes we are waiting around for somebody else to do something nice for us. And one thing that I have found to be a beautiful part of my life is doing loving things for myself. And I can't imagine doing anything more loving for myself than buying beautiful roses and painting them on a day like today. So I'm super excited about teaching you more about roses and about all of the love that we're going to get back from working on this painting today. So let's dive in and get started. Okay, hello everybody, welcome back. So today we have these really gorgeous roses that I feel so fortunate to have here to paint today, and also to try to break down for you the fundamentals of painting a rose like this, and specifically in this case, of course, an open rose. So I've got 3 roses here. You could do this a couple of different ways. You could either include the vase, which is what I'm going to do here in mine, or you can zoom in. I could see you even doing this as like a horizontal and as a vignette of these 3 roses going horizontal across the canvas. So you get to decide on your composition if you want to include this vase or not. Of course, the primary focus of this lesson is going to be on the anatomy of a rose and understanding the form of a rose, which is going to help you really get the illusion of a real 3-dimensional rose on the canvas. So first, we want to look at the just the geometric shape of a rose, and you can think of it as a square or as an octagon, or even as a big circle. I do think thinking about it in terms of these angles, which is going to be a little bit more of like a octagon or hexagon type shape, gets you a little bit closer to the structure of the thing. Now, the thing that I always recommend that people think about whenever they are studying roses is the fact that they're very similar to bowls. So, for example, we've got one rose that is almost totally frontal, right? Front facing towards us. We can see a little bit of the underplane, but the light and shadow pattern of that rose is going to be just like it is with the bowl. It's going to be darker on the left side and more lit up on the inside of the rose on the right side. So if you have a bowl handy in your studio, I highly recommend it. Lining up the bowl in the same orientation as your rose and your setup to your light source so that you can see these simple plane changes. So the pink rose is in this angle, and so that means that whatever we can see of this side of the pink rose is going to be lit up, and whatever we can see of this side of the rose, the open part, the bowl part, the more concave part is actually in shadow, and so is this right underplane. Then we have this other rose back here, and it's kind of tilted away from us and in profile. And what we can see there is that we see mostly this underplane, which is in shadow, and then we see a little bit of these lit edges that are still catching a little bit of light on the top. Okay, so that's the basic structure of a rose. So we've got one that's more frontal, it's slightly kicked to the right, and then one that's really kicked to the right, and then one that's really kicked to the left. So that's going to be our basic structure. Now, the next thing I want to consider before I even get into painting the rose, and this goes for every painting, no matter what, is that you must set up your values. So even though we do have light and shadow pattern on each of these roses, we have an overall value structure in the whole painting that we have to get clear in our mind's eye first. So I'm going to use some black, some raw umber, some yellow ochre here, and I'm going to get a really deep, rich green with a lot of my medium at this stage. So I can really spread this around, and it's okay if I don't, get it completely thick and solid everywhere. Now I also kind of play around with this mixture. I'll, start dipping into reds and greens, and as long as I get something that's kind of dark and, ambiguous in color, let's say, then that's okay. So I tend to kind of like to play around, switching up my mixtures even in a background so that it's not all just one solid mixture. But so my background is really one of my darkest values, and then by the time we get over here we start to see more color in it and it starts to go lighter. So I'm going to add some white, some yellow ochre to that to get it a little bit lighter. And if the white makes it feel too cold, I'm going to add back in some of the colors. And then, so. Now, I'm not going to be too terribly concerned right at this moment with specific color in the background or temperature, So I'm just kind of going for like a base greenish color. And a lot of times what I end up doing is painting back into that. Maybe some cool tones, maybe some warm tones. You can see how much medium I have in my brush right now. All that paint's just really oozing out. Now, the vase is pretty easy actually. It's just like a lighter version of the background. So I'm just going to put in some of this light background color with some more white and Naples yellow. We'll just lose some edges right now. And then I still have some kind of dark stuff over here. Maybe even get some more green with some Chinese orange and some of my phthalo green deep for some of the suggestion of the leaves in here. But I'm going to do this really loosey-goosey and quick here so that we can get to those roses. But the main point is that the roses are really lighter shapes within the composition. And so I want to make sure that I get all of the darks in, because in painting we work, oil painting, we work dark to light, thin to thick. And so I really want to make sure I get all of these darker tones in. So that whenever I do go to paint the light and shadow on those roses, that it really pops forward to the eye quite quickly. Okay, so then looking here, I see I kind of need a little darkness here against the lit side of the vase, where that shadow's kind of continuing on through the vase. Now, we also have cast shadow on the ground plane. I'm just going to use that same color right now. Just because it's the right value, and since it's similar to the background, it will work. It'll make sense. Now on the top plane here, I might throw in some more warmth, like the burnt umber and maybe some transparent red oxide or the Avignon orange. And I want to fuse this edge here. I don't want that edge, calling attention to itself, especially since this is shadow and that is shadow. Now, again, this is just a guesstimation of what I'm going to end up with in that background, but it's also close enough so that I can really start on the roses. Now, my lightest value is really in that center rose. The two white roses, but especially this center one because it's more lit up. Even the pink rose is a little bit lower in value because it has more color to it. But we're going to start with this center one. And we're going to think about that structure again, that bowl structure, where the right hand side is in light, the left hand side is in shadow. Now the only thing we don't get with this bowl is all of these little sort of ruffle-like petals that are curving over and catching the light outside of this center. So imagine that this is just like the center of the bowl and not all those petals that are attached around it that would be sort of curving out and under as they start to do. So because I know that this is all a light shape, I want to make sure to really clean up any of this burnt umber. And just getting back to the white of the canvas is going to help me make sure that I keep a clean enough color mixture here. And now I can also kind of lose a bit of that construction drawing that I started with as well. Okay. And then while I'm here, I'm just going to look for, remember that side of the bowl here on the pink rose, this is lit up, this is not. So wiping out for the lit up parts of the lit up part and leaving that umber for where the shadow part's going to be. Okay, and even though this is all in shadow, it's really a light shape value-wise within the whole composition. So in this case, I'm just going to wipe out and just kind of look a little more closely at the shape here of the main body of the rose, because at this angle I'm standing on the shadow side of this rose, and there, with roses and flowers and leaves, so much light passes through their petals, just like a grape or glass, you know. So glass, we've got light passing through, so we'll actually have the lightest value on the what should be the shadow side because it's a transparent object. And so then I'm also going to just continue. We've got this one little leaf here that's poking out and catching the light, so we're going to wipe away for it as well. So, okay, so now I've got the basic value structure. I've got this all cleaned up, you know, to where that burnt umber is not going to dull and darken my color. That's very important when you're working wet into wet. Realizing that, realizing that whatever you have underneath and you put something on top, whatever's underneath is going to affect whatever you put on top. Okay, so now with a relatively big brush, I'm going to start to break down that basic structure. I don't want to go too dark, even though there's shadow side here, because this whole shape is a light shape. So on roses, you generally have like your warmest color or your most saturated and richest color on the center, the very inside of the rose. So I'm going to start just with, you know, some ochre, some Naples yellow, some white, and then I'm adding some Chinese orange here to really get this nice glowy color right in the center. And the darkest part, the darkest accent is always right in the center, but try to never go too dark. I would say go for a color over like a umber or, you know, something that looks gray, because again, with roses, most of the color saturation happens in the center of the form. And while we do have grays and whatnot in here, we want to keep it, it's a painting, you know, we want to keep it beautiful, colorful. And the fact that this has color, it's going to be darker in value already. So anything lighter we build on top of it is really going to look, you know, nice and lit up. So if this is actually my darker value, then I'm going to add a lot of white to this and start to get my lighter value, which, as you remember with the bowl, is going to be on this right hand side, because this is a concave form. Now we've got all these little ruffles and whatnot in here, which makes it feel, you know, very full and convex, but the actual form is quite concave. So like a bowl or a plate, on this side is where our lightest colors are. I'm going to hop down and kind of look for some of these lighter colors on the petals on the outskirts here. I start at the end of the petal, pull up into the interior so that my sharpest, cleanest lit edge is where it needs to be. And then even using the ground, you know, you can just, with a slight little tickle of the brush there, get sort of a grayish, cool look to the paint. Remember that anytime you put a light value over a dark value, you're going to create like a cool graying color. And I'm just leaving some spaces in between there, which will come back in for some little accents of layers in between. Now, this side is going to get a little bit narrow. We're actually seeing a little more of this right side. So I want to make sure to kind of turn my brush to the side and do some more narrow type brush strokes here for the little lit edges that are on the very edge of the rose. Okay. All right, so then I'm going to go to the pink rose. I'm going to use a lot of white here, and I think I'm going to use just alizarin crimson to start with some white. And as you can see, that gives me a really cool pink. And I think I'm going to add just a little touch of cad red light to get it a little more, a little warmer. But in this light of this pink rose, I really want to wash out a lot of the local color and go for light over local color. Okay, so sometimes you've just got to make that choice. And I think in this case we need, again, we're gonna have the opportunity to put more local color in the center of the form that's in shadow. So I think let's take this opportunity to keep that light really lit up and flowing here where these lights kind of connect. But thinking about that structure of the form, first and foremost, form, you know, that form should always come first. The structure of the thing and how it relates, how it's oriented to its light source. Now, like the bowl, we get a couple little pieces here on the far right that catch a bit of light, and that's a really beautiful effect. So I'm just going to put in a couple of those. Now, on this far rose, I'm going to use a little bit of umber in here with the white, and as you can see, I'm going to need to reload my white quite quickly. And anytime you get your piles too spread out like that, you guys, use your knife or use your razor blade or your palette knife and scoop it back up into a workable pile that you can actually put on your brush. So I want to compare this white to this white, and what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of glow, there's a lot of transmitted light passing through it, and it's kind of taking on a little bit of a greenish tint, a little bit of a grayish tone to it. So even though it is lit up, and I do want these values to be close, I want this color to be a little bit different. Like a little bit cooler, you know, and then we've got some of that warm glow that flows through there as well. So I'm going to use something to neutralize and kind of gray it down. So it could be some raw umber or some ivory black is always good. And then we do have some light accents on this rose. And so later on I can come back in and hit those accents. So I'm just going to softly, you know, kind of soften these edges into the background. This one is in shadow, and I do want it to be a little bit quieter than these other two here. So anytime you want something to be a little quieter, then you want to kind of soften the edges, you know, or bring the values closer together. But softening the edges automatically will make it look less lit up and recede more to our eye, whereas really thick, crisp edges will come forward more to our eye. Okay. And once I get enough of this going, then I want to go back to that, you know, that sort of star attraction, the payoff of the painting. Just right quick, I'm going to take, I've already got this color on my palette and I see somewhere else I can use it, which is like here on the light passing through the glass. So if my eye kind of catches things like that, like, ooh, look, there's that same color down there, or similar value, I'll kind of grab that and put a note of it in there. It doesn't mean that it's done, but it's a way of working up the entire painting at the same time, and also keeping your eye moving around the setup. Which is why, with this setup, it could be really tempting to just zone in on just that, just those roses, and then you start to see all these little contrasts, all these value contrasts, all these little changes and nuances, and you always have to be relating everything to the rest of the painting. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's one reason why doing something like that, keeping your eye moving around the whole painting, will most likely end you up in a better position, because you're not, your eye isn't being allowed to focus too much in any one area too long. Because anytime it does that, you start to tend to paint things out of whack with one another. That's the professional term. So I'm also seeing that there's a little bit of light over here as well. Okay. So now let's go back in and let's just get a few more details on the center rows. Actually, before I do that, we need to fill in this pink stuff in the middle here. So basically, I've already got this mixture here. I'm going to use a little more color into it. And if that feels a little too intense in color, I'm going to grab something like the background color. And if I have some background color that I can just steal right next to it, I'll just go ahead and rob some background color. Because with shadow, it's like you can have a rich color, but you also want it to read as shadow. So if it gets too intense in color, it may not read as shadow. So there's always that fine line with shadow. Okay, so that's a little bit better. I put some raw umber, some more white in it, and even some yellow ochre to kind of warm it up a little bit. Now what's interesting is with the background is that, you can either, here the values could be really close, or you could choose to make the background darker or lighter against the pink of this rose. But all of this is in shadow as well down here. Black too is a great darkener if need be, and with red, of course, that's going to go more to the violet, which is kind of nice in this case. These pinks and yellows and greens. Okay, so the next part that I want to look at is just looking at getting a little more definition into that center rose. Okay, and I'm going to start with some raw umber and yellow ochre, because there's sort of these kind of neutral greenish tones in there. That looks like that's going to be way too dark whenever I hold my brush over. So I'm going to add some white back in to that mixture. Just trying to get something a little more neutral, but not gray, I'm going to keep it kind of in the warm, but also I don't want it to be so dark that it just looks like a black inky hole in the center. Keep in mind that very center, nucleus there, I guess you might say, is what everything's sort of radiating around. And so I'm going to go a little bit richer and darker here. Let me hold this over. I think that might be okay. I do want to push the value there, a little touch darker, but I want it to be very, just still kind of a subtle shift. So the darker that this goes, the more deeper the inside of that rose is going to feel. Again, some of this greenish gray stuff on the left side, and just trying to carve out that, you know, that kind of center of the bowl a little more clearly. You go back to some raw umber and Naples yellow here, which is very similar to what we have in the background, by the way, the background color. But we do kind of get these little cool nuances in here. But again, I don't want it to just look gray, so the yellow really helps keep it harmonious and kind of a nuance to the thing. Then we actually have some entire petals on the white here that are entirely in shadow and go kind of cooler, so that color is going to work great there. And that's really where we're going to start to separate out some of these folds and overlaps with the raw umber, the Naples yellow. If you don't have raw umber, you can use black, even burnt umber would work, just something kind of neutral. And we're going to start to finesse this, the detail on this a little bit more. I will always sacrifice whatever is underneath here for the sake of the rose standing out more. So if that means that the whole top part of this glass just kind of fuses into the background, then that's, you know, that's something that I'm willing to sacrifice, because the rose is in front of the glass and it's more important. Okay. So now I want to really start to look at the contours and look to see, you know, where we kind of get these little V-shape petals that I always say it like they've escaped the herd, you know. They've escaped from the main center shape here. And the outer edge there is what's most important. My rose has gotten a little bit big, but that's okay. So sharper edge, and clearer drawing on the outer edge, and softer on the inside edge. Okay, and then going back to, could even go even a little cooler here with some green, you know, just for some color pop here, to start to, you know, kind of separate out some of these little layers of petals in between. Trying to keep my brush relatively flat here. And this is also just such a beauty of putting down good paint to begin with in that light, because we can drag paint and color into that lit up paint. And because it's so lit up, you know, it's not going to weaken the look of the light. All right. Haven't really used any cadmium. We get a lot of glow right about here. So maybe more Naples yellow and some cadmium to really try to capture this piece here that goes a little bit glowy. And, you know, I'm just trying to make brush strokes that sort of imitate the look of these kind of ruffly petals. But again, start on, you know, which part of the form is most clear to your eye, and then lift off the brush and weaken the edge on the inside. So I always say, you know, crisp on the outside, soft on the inside. But you really have to be paying attention to which edges are getting more light and overlapping more. Now, what's interesting is the more and more you start to delve into this, you can start to do more and add more, and sometimes really the more you add, the worse it can start to get, you know. So using it's like, how far do you want to deviate just from that simple shape before it starts getting too broken up and too busy? All right, so now utilizing the paint that's around things to really start to frame out the drawing a little bit more would be really helpful. So I'm going to use some burnt umber, let's do some cad yellow, black. Basically my darks and my yellows, I wanted like a really rich dark and kind of warm. I wanted like a warm greenish background here. Now you're going to start to carve out for some of these petals, and that means that you're going to have a, you know, sharper edge around the contour, but you're kind of blending these two colors together essentially. But that's one way that you start to get more of your drawing, and then any like edges that you need to be a little more fused or quiet, could start to soften those edges a little bit more. I also use my bristles perpendicular to just kind of drag paint over, which has a softer look than flat to the picture plane. Using just a tip of a brush to kind of carve in. And then since this one's really lit up, why don't we just, you know, maybe put some more yellow here into the background, like it's nice and glowy. Still darker in value, but starts to bring like a richness of light to the thing. So I hope that this has helped everybody understand, you know, just the fundamentals of the, you know, structure of a rose and how to approach it as simply as we can, because, you know, I've been in that position before where I've been so terrified to paint a rose, and then sometimes I've watched people paint them and they don't start with these big simple shapes, and it could be because they've been painting them for so long and they've got like this formula system down. But you know, I think always going back to the basics of the form first and understanding how the light is moving across that form, you can paint anything whenever you understand that. It's not necessarily about a particular subject matter in that case. So everything is figure outable, everything is learnable here. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do it. You know, you don't have to be like a rose specialist, you know, to paint roses. But I've definitely been in that position before where they were just terrifying, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'll ever be able to paint these because they're so complex. So my hope is today that I at least help break down some of that complexity for you in this short lesson. So I'm wishing you all happy painting, and thank you so much for being here and watching. Bye.